able to speak and come on. So, Maitreya, can you unmute, or Angelina, can you unmute them one by one and see if they're able to speak, if you're able to hear them?
Sure. I'll just.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
This is
Eleni, you're
Eleni.
audible.
Yeah.
You're
Good
audible.
morning.
Yes,
Thanks.
Eleni.
Yeah.
Morning. You're audible. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible too. Thank you
Yes.
so
Yes.
much.
Okay.
I hope
Thank
everyone's
you.
able to hear them. Now, as I said, this is a session where we would like to talk about some of the most invisibilized conversations, some of the conversations that we often miss out. This is an opportunity to discuss how to make the internet more inclusive in a broader sense, but also more particularly as we all move towards establishing data protection regimes, establishing privacy regimes, including those of us in India. This is a chance to have a conversation about how our data protection and privacy regimes can make the internet more inclusive instead of more exclusive. That's the basic idea, the basic sense with which we've started. For our session today, we have a workshop policy to make sure that people are able to access this, people who are joining us both online and on site with diverse abilities, with different kinds of disabilities. They're able to experience this session as well as the rest of us. So just a couple of pointers. We are requesting all of our speakers to briefly describe their physical attributes in their own words. For instance, I'm Fawaz. I'm a bearded man, kind of big, and I'm wearing a gray jacket today. I have short hair. Just something small, brief like that. Whenever you're speaking, it'll be helpful to bring everybody in to make it a little bit more of an inclusive conversation. So thank you in advance for that. And apart from that, we have, if you want a detailed look at the workshop policy, although I'm sure there's nothing very difficult, there's nothing extraordinary that we're asking. It's just basic stuff, being respectful, being inclusive, bringing everyone into the conversation. But we do have the workshop policy. The QR code is with Nidhi. You can scan that, take a look. You can also use it for your own sessions, customize it, give us feedback. We also have another document during the Q&A session. We'll show you that document. It is a shared Google document in which we'd like to build some code of best practices for inclusive internet. So that's something we'll invite all of you to participate in. For the online participants, my colleagues Angelina and Tithi will be sharing them in the chat. For the on-site participants, my colleague Nidhi has a QR code that you can scan and you can get access to. Now, before we begin, before I introduce, this session has been organized and conceptualized by my colleagues at the Center for Communication Governance, Angelina and Tithi. You can see them both on the screen right now. And they've also recently authored a policy brief on disability and data protection, which looks particularly at the new law in India, and it looks at its interaction with the Persons with Disabilities Act, and it tries to give a sense of where we are standing, and an overall position. So before we begin, I would like to request Angelina, Tithi, just take 10 minutes, walk us through your brief and lay out what you envision for this session. And after that, we have an excellent panel of speakers. I'll be introducing them one by one, and we'll take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Fawaz, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Tithi Yogi. I'm an analyst at the Center for Communication Governance. My pronouns are she and her. I wear glasses, I have wavy hair, and I'm wearing a red hoodie today. Over to you, Angelina. You can introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. My name is Angelina Dash, and I'm a project officer at CCGNLU Delhi. My pronouns are she and her, and today I'm wearing a red jacket and I have wavy hair. Over to you, Tithi.
So today's session is based on a policy brief on data protection for persons with disabilities in India that, like Fawaz mentioned, Angelina and I have co-authored and have been working on for a while. So while India has indeed taken a step forward towards inclusion of persons with disabilities in its data protection framework online, we have identified some gaps in its nuances, and we have tried to plug in some loopholes to sort of further advance the digital inclusion for persons with disabilities. So some common themes that we have identified in this data protection framework, specifically for persons with disabilities, are the themes of digital access and inclusion, data autonomy, and data protection. So I'll start off with something on what we have found on digital accessibility, digital access and inclusion. Specifically, in our research, we have identified that digital accessibility is a precursor to persons with disabilities giving meaningful consent on the internet. While the disability rights framework in India guarantees the right to accessible information and communication technologies, persons with disabilities, the data protection law does not really mandate the data fiduciaries to operationalize or implement consent mechanisms that have accessible interface and can be used easily with persons with disabilities. Um, Also, another thing that we have identified through our research is that data protection law allows guardians of persons with disabilities to sort of give consent on their behalf. So that sort of reduces or takes away the onus of giving consent from the person with disability and shifts that to the guardian of person with disability. And this in turn takes away the incentive that fiduciaries might have had to make their consent mechanisms more accessible towards persons with disabilities, because now it's not the persons with disabilities who are giving consent directly on these consent mechanisms, but it's their guardians. So based on our findings on digital accessibility, we recommend making notice and consent mechanisms compliant with some accessibility standards and compatible with assistive technologies, use of audiovisual formats in these consent mechanisms, electronic braille, etc. I'll hand over to Angelina to continue this discussion on digital accessibility. Over to you.
Thanks, Sati. So I think another concern that we have in terms of access and inclusion is in the context of limited access to digital services without the consent of their lawful guardian. So under the data protection law in India, persons with disabilities require the consent of their lawful guardian in order to access digital services on the internet. This is concerning because of two scenarios that may arise. What do these scenarios look like? In the first case, we have with disabilities who cannot access digital services where the support and consent of the lawful guardian may not be required at all. For instance, maybe something like a digital encyclopedia. In the second case, we have persons with disabilities who are hindered from accessing digital services which provide vital disability resources, like perhaps online communities for persons with disabilities. Access may also be curbed in cases where a conflict of interest may arise between the lawful guardian and the person with disability. This could include access to digital helplines for physical and sexual abuse, among other digital services. So our recommendation in this context is that persons with disabilities must be allowed to access digital services on the internet without the consent of their lawful guardian in certain cases. Over to you, Tithi.
Thanks, Angelina. I'll now speak about the second theme that we have identified, and that is of data autonomy. So in India, indirect consent through another person is collected from two kinds of data principles, that is children and persons with disabilities. So in the Indian data protection law, children and persons with disabilities have been clubbed together and subjected to similar treatment while giving consent. That is their parent, that is in the case of children, or their lawful guardian in the case of person with disability gives consent on their behalf. This treatment leads to infantilization of persons with disabilities on the internet, since their guardians are now being equated to parents, to the status of parents, which is not the case. Because if we look at the disability rights framework in India, a lawful guardian for a person with disabilities is envisioned to be somebody who aids them or assists them and helps them with decision making process in a mutually consultative framework. So in the data protection law that India has right now, lawful guardians of persons with disabilities have that ability to give consent on their behalf completely without accounting for any mutual decision making. So in our research, we have recommended decoupling persons with disabilities from children and introducing a separate provision in the data protection law that defines persons with disabilities. This definition for persons with disabilities would take into account temporary disabilities, the degrees of support, the various degrees of support that a person with disability might need. We have also suggested that any consent collection processes online be informed by a consultative framework between persons with disabilities and their guardians, which is driven by principles of mutual decision making. I'll now hand over to Angelina to speak about the third common theme that we have identified. Over to you.
Thanks, Tithi. So I think another gap, as you mentioned previously as well, that we identified was in the context of data protection, specifically with regard to the absence of sensitive personal data. So the data protection law that was introduced in India last year came after a long consultative process, and previous iterations of this law had carved out sensitive personal data, or SPD. This was not included in the final law. Now, firstly, what is SPD? SPD was a distinct category of personal data warranting additional safeguards. And what did these safeguards look like? These included specific grounds for processing, including grounds like explicit consent or specific purposes of state action. Now, it's important to question at this stage why does the need for a separate category of SPD arise in the first place? So there are some concerns which scholars have been raising regarding sensitivity of data being used as a basis for categorization. However, we feel that India's data protection framework is currently at a very nascent stage. And additionally, certain data of persons with disabilities can be more vulnerable, like health data or financial data. And this data is more susceptible to misuse for the purpose of discriminating against persons with disabilities, particularly in terms of employment, healthcare, and social welfare. Therefore, our recommendation in our policy brief is that sensitive personal data as a category should be introduced for personal data within India's data protection law. And with this, we'd now like to talk about moving from the policy brief to today's IGF session, where we'll be continuing the discourse on centering disability in internet governance more broadly. So, through our insights from working on the policy brief and lived experiences from stakeholders who are persons with disabilities, we have gained an understanding of how there are certain gaps in internet governance discourse with regard to disability. And I'd like to hand over to Tithi at this point, and she'll elaborate a bit more on the gaps we identified. Over to you, Tithi.
Thank you, Angelina. So, some of the loopholes that we have discovered in the discourse on data governance globally as well as in India, and we would really like the insights from the participants today to share their experiences and what they feel about this. So, the first kind of loophole that we saw was that this explicit categorization of persons with disabilities as data principles in the Indian data protection law, this happens to be an anomaly of sorts because we haven't really come across as this distinct categorization of persons with disabilities as data principle in any other major statute which has been enacted. So this is something that we have been discussing as to whether this separate categorization of persons with disabilities, whether this was a good measure, is this going to benefit persons with disabilities, is this the right approach or the wrong approach? We are aware that the GDPR refers to certain vulnerable classes of data principles, but does not mention persons with disabilities exclusively. We would like to take this opportunity to get insights from the participants as to whether they feel that the GDPR approach is the way to go, or whether the Indian approach of specifying a certain category of data principles as persons with disabilities and having specific measures with respect to consent collection from them, is that the approach to go? We are also aware of discussions on the presence effect on data governance and whether GDPR would be a good influence, or is the novel approach that the Indian law is taking, is this the way forward? We would really like to hear some discussions on this from our speakers as well as from the participants. I will now hand over to Angelina to discuss some other loopholes. Over to you, Angelina.
Thanks, Tithi. So I think another loophole that we identified was the lack of a global south or a global majority perspective in discourse regarding disability in internet governance. The persons with disabilities are not a homogeneous group. Members of this community, especially those from global south or global majority jurisdictions like India, can often face unique and diverse challenges in terms of internet accessibility and data autonomy. This may arise from intersecting marginalization in terms of gender, caste, poverty, illiteracy, as well as broader infrastructural concerns and digital divide. Internet governance discourse currently does not adequately account for these challenges. And that's where we come in and we aim to highlight some of these issues through the discussions in the workshop today. And with this context and background that we've just provided and the gaps that we have identified, we intend to build upon the work in our policy brief and sort of extend the conversation to also address disability and data protection in the context of AI and automated decision making systems. We hope to use this session as a forum to facilitate multi stakeholder conversations and collaboration. This will enable the co creation of best practices towards digital inclusion for persons with disabilities. With this, I would like to conclude our presentation and I now open the floor for any questions. Fawaz will be assisting us in this Q&A round.
Thank you. So I think we're doing a slight change in the format because we're running a little short of time. So what we'll do is we'll take all questions. We'll have 2 rounds of questions. So the presentation questions also we'll take after the first round. So we just having to change on the fly, sorry. But now without further ado, let's move towards the conversation. Thank you for starting the conversation. We'll now move towards the discussion. And first off, I would like to invite our on-site speaker, Osama Manzar, to please join me on the stage. We also have 2 excellent speakers joining us online. We have Eleni Borsino, who's a consultant with UNESCO. And we also have Maitreya Shah, a lawyer, researcher, currently at a tech policy fellow at UC Berkeley. I'll be introducing all 3 of our speakers in more detail as I ask them questions. But also just to remind all of you, this session, we'd like to have it as conversational as possible, as open-ended as possible. So we'll be doing a first round of questions. We'll have 4 to 5 minutes each for each of the speakers. Then we'll open it for questions. I encourage all our on-site participants to please ask all our speakers as well as Tithi and Angelina about this topic, about this issue. After also all our online participants, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Tithi, who's our moderator online, will be taking those questions and relaying them to us for our speakers. So after the first round of our speakers and questions, we'll have another round and we'll end with a round of interventions. So we have about 1 hour left. 60 minutes is a good time to do this, I feel. And now to begin the conversation, I think I'll first invite Eleni, who's joining us. Eleni Borsino, who's a consultant who works with UNESCO's communication and information sector, especially on universal access to information. And Eleni, if you could unmute yourself, we would like to begin this conversation by asking you, what role do you think digital accessibility plays in furthering sustainable development goals, especially working from your own experience? What would you describe as the role of digital accessibility and inclusive design in enhancing digital autonomy, not just access, but also digital autonomy for persons with disabilities? But Eleni, over to you. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for the invitation. I'm very honored to be in this panel today. My name is Eleni. My pronouns are she, her. Today I'm wearing a very Indian shirt and I have wavy hair. You can, I mean, I don't know if my camera can be switched on, but if you want, you can switch on.
I think we can switch on the camera. Tithi, can you just check?
So thank you very, very much for this. So, and for the very meaningful question. So the digital accessibility and the SDGs it plays a very critical role by fostering inclusion and equity, and particularly for what you call persons with disabilities, but in general, any marginalized groups. So by removing usability barriers, it bridges the digital divide enabling participation in the digital economy and what we call in the UNESCO communication and information sector, the knowledge societies. So this supports the IGF and the Global Digital Compact agenda of leaving no one behind and aligns with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, promoting social justice and equity. From the other hand, there are also accessible tools such as OER and UDL that play a significant role in empowering education, that is SDG 4, reducing dropout rates from school and enhancing educational outcomes and promoting lifelong learning. Additionally, accessible digital solutions can address challenges related to gender and disability, that is SDG 5, and can empower women and girls with disabilities to access education, employment, and leadership opportunities. And finally, for SDG 17, that is international collaboration, the accessibility standards can provide open solutions that contribute to global cooperation, fostering access to information and promoting partnerships. So in the context of data autonomy, digital accessibility and inclusive design play a huge role in enabling individuals with disabilities to engage with and control their data. Accessible data systems and platforms allow users to interpret and manage data independently, ensuring that everyone, regardless of ability, can participate in data-driven decision-making. What we call in UNESCO open solutions, that is solutions that are cost-effective with open licensing. It can be free and open source software or open educational content, and OER platforms provide resources that empower individuals to control their data and engage in lifelong learning. Accessible formats and assistive technologies enhance understanding and trust in data-driven systems, while universal and inclusive design mitigate biases in automated decision-making, ensuring fairness and safeguarding marginalized communities from discrimination. So the key takeaway for embedding is that embedding digital accessibility and UDL principles in policies and practices can ensure equitable participation in the digital economy and knowledge society. And first, by improving data collection and analysis, AI can support more inclusive and equitable decision-making, ensuring that marginalized communities, including those with disabilities, are considered in policies aimed at achieving the SDGs. And second, a human-centric approach to AI and digital tools, essential for ensuring that the benefits of AI are distributed equitably and contribute to sustainable development goals, including promoting data autonomy and accessibility. So that's all for me for now, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Eleni. We'll come back to you. And now I'd like to go to our on-site speaker, Osama Manzar. Osama, as we know, is director of the Digital Empowerment Foundation, and he works with a large community network of digital fellows who are not just working on improving access to internet, but also on who have a mandate effectively to train people, to work with people, to make the internet a safer and more inclusive space. It's in and Today particularly, we are very happy to have Osama with us because recently DEF has also come out with a report that is looking at ICT for empowerment, inclusivity and access, and it's a report in which they've spoken to more than 250 persons with disabilities, uh, uh, and mapped the various challenges, also the opportunities. And so I would like to invite Osama to share some of those things with us. Also, to start off, I would like you to talk a little bit about doing this kind of work. When you look at the challenges that are associated with uh, gathering data on disability, talking to persons with disability, while also maintaining autonomy, maintaining anonymity where it's required, uh, doing that and balancing it with the need for having good data to work on disability. This becomes an even more urgent question when it comes to issues of census. One thing that your report is talking about is the need for a new disability census in India. So some of those things, I know it's a very broad question, but I'd like you to start with that, and we can move on from there.
Yeah, thank you, Fawaz. I will focus my discussion more on ground realities and also with the entire community of PWDs or whoever we call it. We have only 4 or 5 minutes, so I'll say that there are three things very important. The one is that we treat our people with disability as subjects, as or I don't want to say object. I would have said object, but more like somebody about whom we need to do something where there is no role play from themselves, right? Yeah, so exactly, like weak and excluded and all that. So that's a very behavior of the doers, whether it's corporate sector, government sector, or able people, all philanthropists, anybody. Everybody thinks that there's something need to be done. It has been done for so long that if you talk to the disabled people or people with disability, they feel like somebody will do something someday, and we are just waiting. So the whole ability to come out to put their assert themselves, demand, or ask for accountability is almost negligible. Almost negligible. I would say that they are not treated better than any other poor people in a remote areas, or the people who are caste wise or class wise treated absolutely downtrodden. So I'm coming also from the perspective of large scale. We have about what, 50 million population, even more. Yeah, about 5% of the population of India is people with disability. It's as equal as the indigenous community. They are also about 5%. That's a huge number in India. With that one, and then when we started seeing that in the last 20 years digital's development was becoming more like an enabler and an automated enabler for people with disability. And let me also say disability also, see, like now if I don't have access to information, I am more able with digital access device, right? If I don't want to talk to people, then I have something to talk online, and there is this it enables me, my confidence, my requirement, and so on and so forth. At Digital Empowerment Foundation, we realized this by going on the ground, that even though when we were going on the ground to provide digital access or infrastructure, we were seeing that, disability was almost like invisible. Why were they invisible? They were not coming forward. We are not including them. We are not even thinking about them. All the government entitlements that we ought to deliver for them, they are not even coming to take it. We don't know how to talk to them. And then we also realize there is a lot of dogmatic, traditional, look down upon kind of behavior in the community. We look at them with a lot of distance. We don't want to be in close conversation with them or touch them or feel them. They are considered as curse on the society. That's the last thing that one can imagine if you want to do a multi-stakeholder way of growing things. They are not even part of the stakeholdership. So then I'll just next 1 minute. In what we did is that we started talking to them and including them in doing, rather than talking about what's your problem and what's my problem and all that. We thought that, okay, this person is doing connectivity, you can also do connectivity. If this person is running a access point or a public access point, you can also run an access point. If this person is accessing computer and finding a payment for somebody, you can also do that. So everything that we thought anybody can, like anybody, if disabled person can do, we started working with them. So they become part of the working ecosystem. And suddenly they became social entrepreneur or a provider. So earlier their life was seeker, now they are more like provider. And we just created not one but 300, for example, now 500 people who run digital centers, digital access points in village level, and they provide service to all the able people actually. And then what we learned from them is that now you can talk about disability, you can talk about their miseries, you can talk about their requirements, and so on and so forth. And that actually brought us at par, that now on an equal footing to discuss, right? And then we thought that can we replicate this model? So what I am now coming to the last part is how, if you now they are able people for providing service, for talking, for infrastructure development, for digital access, everything, right? They also have more knowledge than others, because they also know extra about the spatial ability to serve the disabled people. And then we did this entire research and found out that, oh my God, government has not done the census for people with disability for so long. Why we don't have that? Now we are asking them, you demand it rather than we demand for you, because we are also going to demand, for the census for the whole country, right? Which is also not done. But can we have a special only for that one? Yeah, it's about 20 years actually. Two decades. Yeah, one decade is lost and another decade is not come. So how can they want? The second thing, they started telling that all the government facilities are actually not implemented on the ground. Like government says that ICT enablement for access of people with disability, the whole digital centers at a public access point is not even able for their it's not wheelchair friendly. The point is that actually digital inclusion in our country and many other country is make even the normal people disabled rather than the disabled people. They have, they can't type, they can't go to the place. You have to do extra, you have to become absolutely audio visual, and those kind of things have started coming in between. Third is that being people with disability, they have more network on data about their own community, right? So they can become a secondary source of information about the spatial lag or spatial abilities of the people with disability, and that we must take advantage is one of the recommendation that we have done. And the last part is that data in any case for anybody is very important, right? About the protection. Why it is more protection oriented approach required for people with disability is because of their extraordinary deprivation way of looking at them. So therefore you have to be more protective about them. You have to be more, make sure that their participation is, their senses is required. And the last part is that do not treat people with disability with let's say mental disability, our researchers clearly said that government has created a legislation where you are infantilizing their ability. I mean, they are very much able, but why somebody else should take a decision on their behalf? Just that because they cannot walk or they cannot do by hand? No, that's not fair. From that point of view, the whole illiterate people in our country, about 40% of the population who cannot access internet is disabled for accessing internet, just because you are not digitally literate. I mean, how can you do that? So that's very, very important. But my last point in this one is that we must do conversation, action, intervention with people with disability in everything, whether you're doing research or data collection or doing something on work. They must be part of the ecosystem. Then only it becomes complete, rather than we say that only conversation need to change, only something needs to change. They must be, it's something like we say, don't do manel, always do panel, which must have a woman. Similarly, can we do that? There is always a panel with one person with disability, at least, can you always have your discussion with one person with disability, always being part of it, so that we normalize participation of disabled people into the normal conversation, is what I would like to say that.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and it's important also to highlight how even sometimes very well-intentioned interventions by civil society, by human rights actors, can also be very infantilizing, patronizing. I think the point you're making, and the same point that Tithi and Angelina were also making. And now, on that note, I would like to move to our next speaker, Maitreya Shah. Maitreya is currently a tech policy fellow at UC Berkeley, also an affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. He's a disabled lawyer and researcher from India, and that he has a unique insight into the challenges that persons with disabilities face with regards to digital access and digital protection. I would also encourage you to actually go and read some of his writings. You can find a lot of them at his page on the Berkman Klein Center as well as on the UC Berkeley website. Do read some of his writings. But Maitreya, I would like to thank you for joining us. And also, I'd like to start by asking you, considering the increasing digitization of essential services, what are the gaps in legislation in India regarding the rights of persons with disabilities in the context of data protection? And also, how can policies that we adopt encourage user-centric approaches in the development of technology that accesses persons with disabilities? Again, a sort of broader question, but we would like you to come in on that and take us through some of these perspectives with your insight. Maitreya, are you able to unmute yourself, I hope?
Yes. Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
thank- Yes, we can hear you.
Hi.
We can hear
Hi.
you. Go ahead.
Hi, Fawaz. Thank you so much for inviting me. And my pronouns are he, him. And I'm wearing a button down with a large pair of headphones. I just started my camera. Hopefully you can see me. I am an Indian with curly brown hair. Sorry, curly hair. So I think
Yes,
this
we
is a
can see
great
you now.
question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this is a great question, and then I'm wondering, what additionally I can, talk about. Tithi and Angelina have already covered this comprehensively, the issues with the current legislative frameworks in India. So I think I'll speak about digital accessibility and data protection a little broadly in the Indian context. So I think to start with, India has always had this issue of privacy for people with disabilities when it comes to digital technologies or even other forms of emerging technologies. A lot of my recent work has been on how Aadhaar, the biometrics-based digital ID system of India, has not adequately considered the privacy and accessibility implications on people with disabilities. How the biometrics, iris scans and fingerprints that Aadhaar collects often exclude people with disabilities because the algorithms and the infrastructure that they use, quote unquote, treat people with disabilities as outliers or as non-normative. So in India, I think this issue has been long-standing. Aadhaar started the project we started way back in 2009, implementation 2012. And even as of today, people with disabilities are facing issues enrolling with the technology and also authenticating their identity as with, especially with public services such as cash transfers or welfare programs. So this has been an intrinsically, I think this issue is long standing. But coming to kind of more legislative, more legal, more policy issues on this area, as Tithi and Angelina rightly said, the data protection law of India treats people with disabilities or equally with children. And I think there are several issues with this. To start with, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, when it was enacted, it in a way takes precedence over other legislations when it comes to disability matters, especially issues such as guardianship. So I think my question is if the data protection law even has a prerogative to design a consent framework where guardianship and other very complex socio legal issues are involved. It is I think the disability law that has done this sufficiently, and I think which is the right framework to address these issues. But the data protection law suddenly starts multiplication of these legislative provisions and starts adding new complexities for people with disabilities. Right. And I think, Tithi and Angelina raised this very pertinent question as to whether the GDPR approach is correct or an Indian approach is correct. And I think this is again a very complicated question, because India, although borrowed heavily from GDPR for the larger legislation that we enacted, when it came to disability, we, I think, did a lot of innovation when we brought this provision. And I think probably, as I said, we don't need a separate consent mechanism or a separate provision for people with disabilities at all. We might be good with the GDPR way of doing things, because, I think the idea is to respect the agency of people with disabilities, not develop new consent mechanisms. Instead, focusing on making your technologies privacy preserving, making your technologies more accessible, seeing that technologies do not unlawfully access a disability or health information of people with disabilities. I think it's more on the, the focus is to shift from user to data fiduciaries or the corporations that are building technologies. I think in India, one of the biggest problems that we have had through our legislations is that a lot of onus is placed on people with disabilities. And with privacy, there's been a lot of scholarly research and a lot of criticism on this individual privacy frameworks. Individual privacy might not be the best way forward, especially with AI and emerging technologies where user agency is already curtailed. So I think we need to think about making the technologies more privacy preserving, rather than keeping putting additional complexities on people with disabilities to coordinate with their guardians, and then work on consent to access even the very basic necessities, because I think digital access and internet access is now a necessity. And I can give you an example of how this is actually playing out on the ground. Recently, I was doing a training session for assistive technology manufacturers in India, and who are specifically building technologies for people with disabilities. And a lot of them told me how the guardianship provision in this complex consent-based provision in the data protection law is raising many issues for them, because it's not giving them adequate opportunity to provide their technologies to people with disabilities. They also wrote to the government saying that this provision needs an amendment, specifically when it comes to assistive technology. So I think this is one very broad issue. The other broad issue is that there has been this inherent trade-off between accessibility and privacy. So at times, people with disabilities are compelled to give away their privacy to access digital technologies. To give you an example, earlier this year, I'd written an article on how these companies that are developing automated tools, claiming that these automated tools can fix websites, make them accessible without changing the source code of it, and how these practices are inherently deceptive. So what it essentially does is it in the garb of making websites accessible, it violates user privacy, because these overlay tools, as they are called, can infer disability status of individuals through collecting data on their screen reader usage or their use of magnification devices, and so on. And although there has been some conversation on this outside India, especially in the United States, in India, this conversation is not happening. And why this is particularly problematic when it comes to privacy is that the adoption of these technologies, whereas it is in a way restricted now in the United States, companies and even the government are increasingly adopting these problematic technologies in India. And to give you an example, you can go back and check this. The India AI portal managed by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, a quote unquote the knowledge platform for India's AI economy, itself uses an accessibility overlay tool. So I think my question is, we need to think about this comprehensively. Digital accessibility is not a tick box solution. We have to think about this a little comprehensively, especially when it comes to privacy. And there are additional challenges due to AI and emerging technologies that we are seeing, that are posing issues for people with disabilities. And I think thirdly, I'll very briefly touch on the issue of India's digital accessibility laws are still very nascent. We have not adequately made our websites, for that it be government or private, accessible. And I think it's also quite singular, in a way that a lot of our digital accessibility frameworks in India focus on accessibility for people who are blind, but does not adequately cater to people who have other forms of disabilities. So, there are challenges of accessibility and privacy even for people, say, who have learning disabilities like dyslexia, or who are autistic, or who have other intellectual disabilities. And I think our laws are still quite, nascent on that front, that we're not adequately thinking about a cross disability approach when it comes to accessibility and privacy. So I think with India, there are many issues at a larger policy level. There are, people with disabilities are not adequately represented in the conversation. There is a duplication and a lack of harmonization in our regulations. And I think we're not adequately regulating the larger sector when it comes to preserving privacy of people with disabilities and ensuring their accessibility at the same time. I'm happy to talk more about this in the question answer and so on.
Thank you, Mitra. I think that's a good point to pause and get our first round of questions and observations. I know some of the conversation has been very India centric, but these are problems which are quite universal, and we are fortunate to have a lot of on-site participants from different areas, different countries. So if questions or any observations, any intervention from your perspective, we'd welcome that. Tithi, also please feel free to tell us any questions from the chat, from our online participants. But yeah, anyone has a question here or an observation? Yes.
Thank you for this opportunity. My question is to our in-person speaker. Since he tried to be practical, I am coordinating the implementation of the African Union Data Policy Framework. And as part of that, we are several stakeholder sessions as part of supporting some African countries to develop their national data policy. And our project wants to be participatory and inclusive. But there is a challenge when engaging persons with disability. So I want to know from your work, what is the best approach when it comes to engaging persons with disability? If there are any recommendations that we can also try. Thank you.
Okay, very practical question, and thank you, because I have a good answer. So I'll just let you know one typical, I'm sure, African country. Which country did you say that you are from?
I am from Ghana, but my work covers several countries.
Okay,
yes.
So I've been to Accra, so I can see some of the villages in Accra or in Ghana, in many other African countries. So listen, imagine a village where you go to, just generally, people are not connected, people do not know computers, and they still need to educate themselves on computers. There is still people there who wants their work to be done, or withdraw their money, or anything, like hundreds of services that you avail is now digitally done, right? That's the scenario everywhere we can see. Now, when you go there, you try to see that how we can provide all this service to the people, right? It's very simple, like, or whether you go to a school and you do a lab, established a lab, or you create a public access point where people can come and withdraw money or file an application or whatever. What we did is that, to do that, we found out, is there any disabled person there, preferably woman, you know, who is who is ready to learn, not educated, not necessary. That's not the basic qualification. Are you ready to take a chance? Are you ready to sit on a computer? Are you ready to handle computers? And all this service that we are talking, you provide through this center, you know, or this facility. So suddenly, so your job was actually just to find out a person with disability and with an intention to serve people, right? And that itself was such empowering thing, because now the disabled person who can't even move and sitting and giving you education on computer, or switching on and off computers and letting you know that this is the way you can work, this is the way you can fill a form, this is the way you can access YouTube, this is the way you can do something, right? So digital became an ammunition from that person to provide a service. Earlier he was or she was sitting at home and waiting so somebody will do some favor to me, right? Suddenly, and you do this from your home, so you don't have to go to a shop. So everybody is coming there, you know, to get those service. For that same service, people used to go to faraway places like 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers, or 10 kilometers, which is very expensive. And also, if you are very highly educated, then you are also very arrogant, you know, and this person is very humble, you know. And then the less, most of the people also start coming there because they think that, oh my God, this person is doing so many things. Why don't we go there and get it done from this person? And that one example become a viral thing for the rest of the people. Imagination change. And this we did not in one. Now we have, out of 2000 locations, 500 locations are run by the disabled people. So the whole narrative changed, the area changed. And then when you ask those questions, which I'm not going to share now, maybe if I'll get a chance, I will share with you that, you know, what are the statistics numbers say? Because 85% of the people are with mobility disability, you know. So you don't have to think for another 15% to be done, while you can do 85% of the things, you know. Why don't you just first do the low hanging fruit, you know? Just the mobility people, just catch them, you know. They are the visual representative of the people with disability. So those are the things that we did, and we can share with you the whole research that we have done with all these 500 people, and how it can actually become a replicative initiative in many other countries.
Thank you. We would also encourage more participants to come up with their questions, interventions, before we move to the next round of discussion. Any questions from the online chat? Otherwise, we can move to the next round of discussion and come back also.
There are no questions on the online chat, but there's one comment from Eleni. Um, Commenting on Osama Manzar's point on involving persons with disabilities in the
We could ask
process. And
Eleni to come in and could you please unmute everyone? Is it better now? No, there's still an echo. Can we ask everyone to be muted for one? Hello? Yeah, I think we are better now. Sorry for that. Bit of a disruption. But Eleni, could we ask you to come in? And I think there was a comment that you had. We are having some technical glitches. I think in the meanwhile, we can continue the conversation here, especially because you already asked a question about, those the work that you're doing at the digital centers. The next round of discussion that we are having is around automatic decision making. But before we go there, there is the question that we wanted to ask Maitreya also, but I'll start with you, Mr. Manzar, maybe, because uh, is it Yeah, I think there's some problem here. Should we wait a couple minutes or we can continue? Yeah. Okay. Uh, yes. What I wanted to ask you was if we could understand a little more about setting up local digital inclusion initiatives, because it's one aspect is what you've been talking about, uh, empowering people, making them providers and enablers instead of being recipient. But there is also the question of the data around disability is also extremely skewered, extremely, we don't have data that adequately represents how persons with disabilities are also a diverse group. So the picture of who is a disabled person is a very settled, very set picture, very stereotypical picture, if I may say. But through your experience, through your work, and including the interventions in the field as well as the research work, you have, of course, a much better sense of this kind of diversity. So when we are trying to design policy at a government level, or we are trying to design intervention at a larger level, how do you think this diversity among persons with disabilities can be approached? How can that be accounted for?
So I would say that it is actually innovation on, I would say, the data collection also and the data contextualization. For example, let's say if we have a diversified, if we have a data which shows the diversity of various kind of disability, let's say. Now the tick box is what are the disability, but there is no tick box or what are the abilities. Right? Because you have to write on the abilities with the same person which is having disability. So what I'm giving example is that, let's say my hands are not working, let's say, one of the disability. But should we only work on making that hand work, or should we work that your mouth is working, your voice is working, your eyes are working, your mind is working, your other parts of the body is working, and how those working and the devices and the able devices can actually make it not even think about my hand. It's something like we used to use remote control which is handled by hand, but now all the remote controls are voice enabled, so voice controlled. So I am controlling all the remote controls by voice. So I don't need my hand for managing. I'm just giving one example. So rather than thinking that, I will create, something non-handheld, you think about what are the things voice enabled, eyes enabled, visual enabled, and that is where the real innovation and contextualization is very important. And I would like to say that while I'm not denying, and it must be that our census or data collection on the diversified people must be done. Beside that, we should have equal effort that what are the already available ability oriented things which is available, which can contextualize. So for example, can we have a list of everything that a mobile phone does, which is directly related to the people with disability? Because mobile device is the most able device among all the other devices in terms of making you work in something like it can transliterate, you don't have to see and it will speak it out your messages. There are many other things that the mobile gives you, and in a very secure manner, by keeping your data also very secure. The mobile does, but I don't know, and many of the people with disability do not know, and especially if I don't know, which I'm a source of enabler in some of the community, then it's a pity that I don't know. And so can there be a whole, what you call the whole write-up, the checklist and everything, that these are the things that we must apply, There are all the able things that let's say digital access public center should be at a village level. It should have a ramp, but it should have 100 other things, which is not done. And for example, none of our websites are voice enabled. None of the websites are hearing enabled, or visually enabled. That is the first thing that we should do, And to do that, you just have to make it mobile enabled. If you do mobile enabled, then automatically your content can also be read out and everything, which rather than doing on a typical web traditional web version. So I'm saying that in the last sentence is that we must do the data collection and data solution from the very high level contextualization and making cross pollination of the facilitation of all the ability oriented things which can enable rather than only focusing on disability.
Thank you, Sam.
I think I'd
the
like to add,
point-
Fawaz.
Maitreya, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think I like to differ with my friend a little bit here, because I think, the problem with the entire data collection effort is not the focus on disability or ability. And in fact, I feel that the very distinction between ability and disability, I think, is a very medicalized conception of disability, because we only focus on particular organ senses or impairments. And I think we have come a long way after a lot of battle and advocacy to kind of do away with that in the society, and especially with governments who have increasingly been relying on impairment based metrics to collect data about people or to categorize people with disabilities. And I think in India this is specifically evident. The 2016 Act only recognizes 21 categories of disabilities, which is a very narrow way of defining disability. If you see the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it talks about a broader approach. It talks about social barriers. It talks about attitudinal barriers, and disability is defined from a more of a social model perspective, where you think about how societies posing barriers for people with disabilities versus what the ability or the disability of a particular individual is. I think that is why this data collection efforts have been failing, because is that we the official data says that people with disabilities are 2 to 5% of the Indian population. But according to the World Health Organization, the 15% of the world population lives with some or the other form of disability. And uh, if you ask me, I think this number is only going to be more in the Indian context, because we also have high numbers of people who are poor, people who face other forms of marginalization, including lack of access to healthcare. So the number of people with disabilities is going to be more. But our data collection efforts have been failing because we don't want to count those people. We don't want to count all those who might be eligible to identify as a person with disability. So I think this ability disability distinction, I feel, is very medicalized, and I think we need to probably take the UNCRPD approach, take a more social model approach, and think about larger barriers, larger universal access issues, when we think about disability and data collection. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maitreya. I think that's well taken. And I could see you nodding through most of it. We can continue this engagement also if you want to.
No, we can have this. I don't have any disagreement to what you're saying, that because maybe when you narrate anything, there can always be a different articulation of different things. So the people who deal with data deal with laws and orders. I don't even know how to do that, but I totally agree that yes, there is a perception of looking at disability from the very medical perspective, and that is the reason why I mentioned that most of our activities are related to not looking at it with several other abilities, and take positive stance on that one to make it more work.
Sure. I think this is an interesting conversation. We are down to the last 20 minutes. So we'll have one more question each to Maitreya and to Eleni. And then we have some time for taking questions and observations from our participants. Before moving forward, I would just like to remind all the participants who've just joined us that we have a document around suggested code for best practices for an inclusive internet. This is a collaborative document. We'll request you before leaving, please get access to the document from my colleague Nidhi, who's standing here. And we will continue to take suggestions till the end of the day, and we'll try to get some of these suggestions included in the IGF call to action. So now, without further ado, Maitreya, I would like to take the next question to you, especially because you've been working on automated decision-making systems. Also, you've been talking about how fairness in AI is a conversation that needs to include persons with disabilities much more. and in your last answer, actually, you were talking about how the automated accessibility plugins that we see are inherently deceptive. Some of that we know is also because of, as we said, the corruption of the data set itself, the fact that it doesn't account for the diversity that is there among persons with disabilities. But I guess my question to you right now is, given this context, how do you think we can begin to ask for accountability from automated decision-making systems, especially from the perspective of persons with disabilities?
Thank you so much. I think that's a great question, and I think I like to break down my answer into sort of two. I think I'll break it based on the two kind of broader technologies that I see in the market. One is quote unquote technologies that are specifically designed for people with disabilities, and the other is mainstream technologies that people with disabilities also use as users. So the first category where we think about automated and AI-based technologies such as assistive technologies, particularly that are designed particularly for people with disabilities. I think when we think about accountability here, I think my first argument is there is a lot of pseudoscience and a lot of these broader unchecked optimism with AI powered assistive technologies. I think everyone these days I feel is coming out with an AI powered assistive technologies in the market without understanding what their implications would be on people with disabilities. To give you a very small example, especially in the care space, for people with disabilities who require caregiving support, people such as, muscular dystrophy or other cerebral palsy or other disabilities who might require, based on the severity of disability, might require caregiving support. A lot of AI-powered smart robots are being adopted across the world, saying that these technologies would be transformative for people with disabilities, not realizing that these technologies might violate privacy of people with disabilities. Whether you do need these technologies at all? Like, why would you need to replace humans with a robot when it comes to disability caregiving? There are many other issues. There are assistive technologies that claim to fix certain disabilities like autism, and I think that is something that is very deeply problematic, because disability is not not an ailment or a disease that needs to be fixed, or an abnormality that needs to be fixed. And there are many AI powered technologies currently in the market that claim to quote unquote cure disabilities. So I think for me, the fairness conversation starts here, to ask if we need a certain technologies for people with disabilities at all. And if we need them, who decides what is good for people with disabilities? Should it be a certain corporation sitting in somewhere in the US, run by non-disabled people, thinking if a technology would be good or bad for a person with disability? Or should it be a person with disability or a group of people with disabilities thinking about technologies themselves? The second broader point is around mainstream technologies, and I think there is so much AI and so much automation around us, and I think that's where people with disabilities are very marginalized in the conversation today. A lot of research that has happened has focused on racial minorities or for gender, but there is very little research that has focused on how AI technologies impact people with disabilities, or how fairness matrix can cater to disability. A lot of my recent research at Harvard has been on how AI fairness matrix and AI governance policies both explicitly exclude disability from their ambit. So to give you an example, a lot of LLMs these days, like ChatGPT, are trained to not discriminate against people of color or people belonging to racial minorities. But they're not trained on avoiding discrimination against people with disabilities. And I've in my work I've illustrated how this discrimination actually manifests with ChatGPT and other generative AI tools like Gemini for people with disabilities. And I think there are several issues with this. There are issues with, as you said, with the data, because, this is a long-standing issue. We don't have enough data on people with disabilities. The data that we have is often very biased because there's been so much societal stigma against people with disabilities in, I think, almost every jurisdiction or every country. So there is this problem of data. Then the other problem is that, people with disabilities usually never considered, they are never thought about when a technology is designed or deployed. So, people with disabilities usually never on the table. The workforce participation of people with disabilities, especially in the technology sector, is very less. So the representation is an issue. And the third is, when you think about governance policies, they also do not adequately consider disability. So when you think about how a technology should be, free of biases, or when they pose risks and so on, disability is not considered. And that's something that you can see in other jurisdictions. So the European AI Act, for example, does not consider how a biometric technology might impact people with disabilities, and they put biometric technologies in the lower risk criteria. Whereas, to me and to a lot of other researchers, biometric technologies pose significant risk for people with disabilities. So I think, there are many issues with the larger AI fairness conversations, the larger AI bias conversations when it comes to disability. And I think to kind of end with, I think I like to put this in like the broad themes of: one, lack of representation of people with disabilities in these conversations; two, a lot of false optimism or a lot of hype around AI-powered assistive technologies without understanding if they are even effective, what they are seeking to do, what is the intent of the companies that are manufacturing such technologies. And I think the third is this larger marginalization of disability from different technological stages, or the different stages of a technology life cycle, right from design, then to deployment, and then to governance. So I think this is broadly my understanding of the larger landscape of automated systems right now.
Thank you, Maitreya. That's a very detailed, and I know you were trying to contain not into a very little. So thank you so much for doing that. We have 10 minutes now, and very quickly, Eleni, if we could go to you in 3 minutes or 4 minutes, if you could just, UNESCO has done so much work on open learning, distance learning. So, and from your own experience, if you could talk a little bit about the challenges of automated decision making, especially in a field like education, and some either guidelines, ethical, safeguards, principles that we should keep in mind when approaching AI systems for persons with for that impact persons with disabilities. And of course, when I say AI systems, I mean AI systems that are absolutely necessary, as Maitreya would say, not just any systems because we want to make them, but AI systems that are necessary or that are going to impact persons with disabilities. Eleni, if you could just respond to that.
Yes,
4
yes.
minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Faraj. So the work UNESCO has been doing in education is about. I mean, we see that there are really a lot of challenges by learners with disabilities in online education. So the accessibility gaps in content and in platforms have to be recognized. There are tools that remain inaccessible, often incompatible with assistive technologies that leave learners with disabilities excluded. So these barriers are also accentuated by digital skill gaps and limited access to resources. We have a lack of inclusive pedagogies and capacity building and training for educators in universal design for learning that further exacerbates these issues. So automated decision-making systems in education pose even more risks for persons with disabilities because biases in data and algorithms often result in discriminatory outcomes such as biased admissions, decisions, assessments, or resource allocation. Transparency and accountability remain significant concerns, and ADM systems often make unjust decisions. And they fail to consider the diverse needs of persons with disabilities. And what we are trying to do by addressing all the challenges is to work with member states on guidelines and implementation policies to include ethical AI development in education, and also guidelines to include policies for not only persons with disabilities. What Mr. Shah said in his comment, that now the definition has to include all marginalized communities and vulnerable groups. Even autism and people with dyslexia and learning difficulties like this. So what we think is, I'm going to share in the chat all the links on some documents that UNESCO has been working on. And I want to end by a field example that we had with the Rwanda Education Board. We worked with the Rwanda Education Board and the Light for the World NGO to foster digital skills development with teachers that have disabilities. And we really saw that it is very, very important to have teachers with disabilities be represented within the communities and the whole education ecosystem. And we had a very, very interesting case study based on that. And they provided constructive feedback on the guidelines. And we actually enriched the guidelines for the governments based on their feedback. So that's all for me. I will share all the links in the chat.
We love that. Thank you, Lenny. And we have some observation from participants. I think we can. We'll just get the mic to you, sir.
Thank you. To introduce myself, I am Dr. Muhammad Shabir from Pakistan, and I am the coordinator of Internet Governance Forum's Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability. So I am really impressed by the discussions, though I am sorry that I joined a little bit late due to another session that I was speaking at. So as the coordinator of Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, I would just want to flag that we have accessibility guidelines. Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability is one of the old setups within the IGF system, and it has been advising IGF on organizing accessible meetings for people with disabilities. So we have a revised guidelines out there on the DC booths, which if person participants can go and see there, get them from there. And if someone needs a Braille copy, that is also available there. Secondly, I would agree with the speaker from Harvard. I think it was Metra. Pardon if I'm pronouncing the name wrong. There are deceptive practices within the data systems, particularly when we talk about AI and algorithm-based systems. Many of the things have already been said, but one concern that I have as a person with disability, we all use a number of AI-based systems. And we all know that data as the oil of AI is being used to train these systems. As person with disabilities, sometimes we use these applications systems for many of our personal documents, personal performances, some work, etc. So there is a lot of private data feeded to these applications and systems of persons with disabilities. Same is the case for people who are hard of hearing, those who use these technologies for interpretation and translation, be in sign language interpretation or otherwise in their conversations. So a lot of data is going into these applications. We don't know because there are privacy policies, but they are, to my understanding, except for Be My Eyes or some other applications, they have not, many of the applications have not changed their privacy policies. So these also need to be looked at from a friendly perspective. One last point that, and it does not need a response, but I want to leave this to you as an afterthought. There is a disability definition by the CRPD which states people have impairments, and disability occurs when those impairment interact with the societal barriers. If those barriers are removed, disabilities are removed. But broadening this definition, and this includes people with learning disabilities, autism, and stuff. But my friends from India would understand there is a lot of efforts of abuse of these definitions by of the disabilities, and getting advantages on behalf of persons with disabilities, posing as persons with disabilities. So on one hand, while I agree that we need to encompass all disabilities into the definitions, but we need to have certain policies where impersonators could be kept out of those kind of facilities where people with disabilities are facilitated, but some impersonators come and get advantages in the name of persons with disabilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doc Saab. I know that there is more scope for conversation right now, but unfortunately, we are very much out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, even if it was for a little bit. And we are still here. If anyone wants to chat, have a conversation, the document is still up. You can comment on it, leave your suggestions. And I would like to particularly thank our on-site speaker, Osama Manzar, for joining us, for sharing your learnings, your experiences. I'd like to thank Maitreya for joining us from such a different time zone and bringing your insights into this. I'm sure we have a lot to learn from you, and I encourage everyone actually to check out Maitreya Shah online, check out his page on the UC Berkeley website. Some very interesting articles. I was recently reading one on how the AI conversation needs to include voices with disabilities. Do go and check those out. Also, thank you so much, Eleni, for joining us, for sharing your very valuable insights. And thank you, everyone, for taking out the time. We'll keep this conversation going. See you around. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.